All right, well, good morning. Great to see all of you. Good morning, good morning. All right, all of you here, all of you online watching, we're so glad that you're here. What a great morning we have together. Great time of worship, time in God's Word now as we begin. I just want you to know that for 22 years I've been preaching here, and almost every Sunday, Kathy leaves a little note for me to find when I get up and get ready to come in early. And, it's something, somewhat predictable, you might imagine. But today, the note I find says, babe, God really loves you. Knock him dead this morning. I'm not sure how to take that. I don't know how you should feel about that. You should talk to her about that. Again, welcome to everybody online. Let me just begin by saying one of my most fond parenting memories is a little season that our family went through where, I guess over the course of several months, we went on different camping trips, and we were working on establishing our family values. Many of you have probably done something similar to that. And we would go on these camping trips, and we would work on them. And the result of that is that our family values were published within our home, into the box Constitution. And so we did that. It was really, really cool. And I remember one time, I think it was our first time to do it. We were gathered in a little 5-person tent in Tyler State Park. It was raining, kind of drizzling, and we're all huddled up. And maybe it was cold. I don't know. But just that feeling. We were all kind of huddled up together. And so we were just starting. And the idea was, let's just start thinking of things that we want to characterize our family. And so we would just gather ideas, and later we would edit and narrow down. And so the very first thing came from our daughter, Kaylee, that I think was about 6 or 7 at the time. And she says, "We don't do drugs." And I just thought, well, what a defining thing. That was awesome. But anyway, over the course of several different months, I think there were like 3 different camping trips, we finally finalized what we call the box Constitution, Box Family Constitution. I'm not going to read this to you, but let me just read the preamble to you. It says, we the undersigned members of the Box family have agreed together in identifying the following values as distinguishing and defining characteristics of our family. Further, we understand that success in honoring these values as a family is dependent upon honoring these values as individuals. And there you go. And as I share that, I want us to think about some more family values. I want us to think of our family values. What are our church family values? What are the things that we would say are defining and distinguishing characteristics about us? And it's an important question for us to ask, because there's some things that we actually are trying to do together. There's some things that we want to accomplish that God has given us to do. And what are the values, what are the characteristics that would sustain that? Many of you know that we have launched a goal earlier this year. It's what we aspire to, that we as a family of believers would be committed to reproducing our mission throughout all generations. Our mission to reach people, our mission to multiply disciples who multiply disciples, who plant churches that plant churches. Like our desire is that every man, woman, and child hears the gospel. Like there are things that we really want to do, that mission that we want to be really involved in, all of us here right now, what I call the now generation. And we want to pass those on to our next generation. And then we also want to be used by God to reach a new generation, people who aren't really connected to us yet. See, there's something that we want to do together, that we're all moving toward maturity. And we're helping the next generation move toward maturity. And we're reaching out to a new generation who doesn't even know us. They may not even know that we're here. They may not have moved into the area yet. Maybe they're just now starting to look, but they're going to come into this area, as many have. How do we connect with them? Well, as we mobilize the now generation to share the gospel with those who they work with and play with and live next to, as we continue to do that, what can we do also to attract those people where they can connect here primarily to connect with Jesus? Like those are things we want to do. So in other words, it's easy for that idea to die out with one generation, but we want to pass it to the next as we reach the new. So there's some family values that we need to embrace that will sustain that mission throughout all generations. And today we're going to begin by introducing you to the very first family value. We've had a number of leaders over the course of the last year who have been gathering together. We've been going on camping trips, huddling together, and no, I'm just kidding. There's no camping trips, no tents. But we've been meeting together and just saying, like, what have been the defining kind of values that have marked our church over the first 22 years? And what are those things that we just recognize were valuable? What are those things that we must maintain and sustain in order to go forward? And so we've said, let's try to put those together. Let's try to define those. And so there are things that are in motion, and everyone who's kind of new that comes into our church family, that we want them to kind of learn and see that these are the family values. These are the values that sustain us. And so that's what we're doing for the next 4 weeks. And so if you have your Bible, turn with me to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, I want to take you through a familiar passage to many of us. I want to draw out some observations. And then I want to introduce you to this first family value. That's kind of our goal here today. Lord Jesus, just help us. Give us understanding and insight as we look into your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Luke chapter 10, as you're making your way there, the Gospel of Luke is in a section where we get these little signals of Jesus' travel. He's making his way to Jerusalem. And so he's talking about on his way to Jerusalem, and on the way to Luke is kind of the way of discipleship. And so we're learning things about what does it mean to follow Jesus. And one of the things that happens is that he comes to a familiar spot in Bethany, this small village. It's like a suburb of Jerusalem, if you will. And when Jesus would come down to Jerusalem, he would oftentimes stay with Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. So let me just read this and we'll draw out some observations. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha." Actually, you never really know the tone. You're just reading the words. But he says, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." Now, the big idea of the passage is not real hard to figure out, right? So you've got one sister who's into serving, and you've got one sister who's into studying or learning or listening to Jesus, and those two things jump at you pretty quick. And Jesus seems to favor Mary, who's listening and serving, and so you can kind of see some immediate ideas here. I want you to just think about it for a moment. If we had a church full of Marys, what kind of church would we be? If we had a church full of Marthas, what kind of church would we be? The other thing is that it's helpful to know that it's not wrong to serve. It's not wrong to serve. Like Martha is all about serving. Jesus had a lot to say about serving. Do you remember what he said? Like, if anyone wants to be great in the kingdom, he must be your servant. If anyone wants to be first, he shall be your slave. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. There's much to be said for Martha activity, for serving. Nevertheless, there's something here for us to learn and embrace as a church for what Jesus says about Mary. And so just kind of with those introductory remarks, I want us to look a little closer to this. And the first thought, if you're following along on your phone or whatever, your notes, the first idea is this, is that when serving is primary, that's a key word. When serving is primary, the soul suffers. When serving is primary, the soul suffers. Now, we see that clearly in this passage. That after being introduced to what Mary's doing and what Martha is doing, Martha says, in verse 40, Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him, to the Lord, and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Now, again, we have to imagine the tone behind it, but I think at least you could say this is somewhat of a complaining spirit. She's not happy with what her sister is doing. And so she comes to the Lord with pretty much a complaint. I mean, this is kind of a loaded phrase. Do you not even care? Like, Jesus, are you noticing? Like all these passive people sitting around you, like, I'm the one that's back here serving, okay? Like, you see that, don't you? Don't you care? Don't you care that my sister's left me alone to take care of this? And one of the things that we see right off the bat is a complaining spirit. Now, it gets worse. I would say she's also somewhat of a controlling spirit. I mean, look, she starts giving direction. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. And so, Lord, here's the problem, and let me tell you how to fix it. You need to talk to Mary. Just send her back here. He doesn't respond to that, but I want you to just imagine for a minute when you make serving primary. When you make serving primary, the soul suffers. And what we see with Martha, this complaining spirit, controlling spirit, what you see is someone that's like resentful. Isn't it easy to be that way? Like you feel like, man, I'm serving, I'm teaching children, I'm working with students, I'm greeting. Like, what are these other people doing? Like, how come they're not doing something? And Lord, do you see them? They're not. Like that kind of resentful kind of thing really can grow in the heart of any of us who have made serving primary. Because when you make serving primary, the soul suffers. Now, Jesus points at that. Okay, so the symptoms we see are just negativity. It's just negativity. And the negativity is this complaining and controlling. But then watch what Jesus says in verse 41. He says, but the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. Now, just a word quickly about these two words. Okay, you're anxious, all right? This is a word for worry. You're worried. It's the word that was used by Jesus in Matthew 6 when he says, hey, don't worry about what you're going to eat or drink or what you're going to wear. The Father knows you have these needs. You don't need to be worried about them. Don't be anxious about these things. It's the word that Paul uses in Philippians chapter 4 about don't be anxious for anything, but with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. The peace of God that passes all understanding will be with you. Don't be anxious. And so this is the word here. And he says, Martha, you're anxious. And so Jesus, who uniquely can see past the symptoms into the source, man, internally, there's something broken in there. Worry, anxiety. And then he uses this word, and you're anxious and you're troubled about many things. It's a word that complements this idea of being anxious, goes a little bit further, kind of has the idea of looking at this state of just a troubled mind. It can involve the idea of stress, that Martha is responding to feeling a lot of pressure, and she's feeling a lot of worry about like she's going to get it done. So, these are words that we can all relate to, can't we? Many of us are often anxious or troubled, and not consistently, not all the time, but oftentimes we can be that way. And sometimes this these things, these feelings, complaining, controlling, this condition of being anxious, these are warning lights on the dashboard of our life. It says, hey, something may be out of kilter here. Martha is a picture of an unhealthy soul. Now, she's connected to Jesus. We have a couple of, like 3 different passages that give us insight. Martha is someone who knows Jesus, connects with Jesus. I'm not saying she's not a believer, but there's something a little off kilter here that Jesus is wanting to fix in Martha. So, that's the deal. Like when serving is primary, the soul suffers. So John Ortberg says this. He says, if your soul is healthy, no external circumstance can destroy your life. But if your soul is unhealthy, no external circumstance can redeem your life. Now, I don't know if you catch that idea, but the idea that Jesus, in trusting him, wants us to have this internal sense of well-being. It's like we sing in that old hymn, "It is well with my soul." That Jesus wants us to be in such a place of trust in him and rest in him that when things are kind of stirred up and crazy and chaotic, it doesn't ruin us. And a healthy soul can live that way. But if your soul is unhealthy, even if everything is going well, you're still not at peace. And so Jesus wants us to have that, and he's going to help Martha learn that idea. And so that's kind of where we are. The symptoms are negativity. The source is basically neglect. The source is neglect. You see again in verse 40, where it says Martha was distracted with much serving. 2 observations just from this one sentence. First of all, she's distracted. That's the idea that your attention has moved from what's important to be focused on. It's moved to something that's secondary importance or worse. She's distracted. There's distraction, and then there is what I think you could argue is obsession. Notice it says that she is distracted with much serving. Now, I would suggest to you that each word is important. So it doesn't say that, hey, Martha's taking care of things in the kitchen. It doesn't say, hey, Martha's serving. I think the fact that Luke, writing under the inspiration of God's Spirit, says that she was distracted with much serving, suggests that maybe she's going way beyond what she probably needed to do, missing the opportunity to sit at Jesus' feet. It had the idea that she's really obsessed with it, that she's really gone way beyond. And so neglecting opportunity to learn from Jesus, to listen to Jesus, to study Jesus, neglecting that has brought suffering to her soul, which shows up in these symptoms of being complaining and controlling and in this condition of things. So anyway, that's kind of what's happening here. Chuck Swindoll, I think, always said this the very best. He writes, busyness rapes relationships. It substitutes shallow frenzy for deep friendship. It promises satisfying dreams but delivers hollow nightmares. It feeds the ego but starves the inner man. It fills the calendar but fractures the family. It cultivates a program but plows under priorities. When serving is primary, the soul suffers. And many times the relationship surrounding that person who's complaining, controlling, full of anxiousness, worry, trouble. That's the picture we're getting of our dear sister Martha. In contrast to that, we see Mary. And the principle that evolves from the picture of Mary here is simply this, is that when study is primary, the soul is satisfied. When study, knowing God, when listening to Jesus, listening to his word, when listening and learning, when study is primary, the soul is satisfied. Now, I want to quickly develop that before I give you our first family value emanating from all this. Okay, first of all, you'll notice that Mary is listening at the Lord's feet, listening to his teaching. She's taking in the Word of God. And then down in verse 42, after Jesus is correcting Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, verse 42, but one thing is necessary. Okay, so there's one thing that is necessary. Now, we suggest from you that wording is language about primary. Like, if you don't get this, no matter what else you do, it's not going to satisfy you. It's not going to help you. It's going to be hurtful, more harmful than helpful. There's one thing that's primary. You get this right, and you get all this other stuff too. But if you make this other stuff serving primary, you don't get any of it. Because when serving's primary, the soul suffers. But when knowing God's word, when that's primary, then one necessary thing, when that's primary, the soul is satisfied. Let me tell you why I use the word satisfied. Okay? As he says, one thing's necessary. That's this. In other words, here's the primary thing. Mary's chosen, and it is a choice. We need to all this morning understand that. You're going to make a choice. I'm going to make a choice today. Going forward, am I about the primary thing or the secondary, tertiary kind of stuff? Mary's made that choice. Also, I want you to see that he says, Mary's chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. I'm really struck by Jesus' use of that word. I think there's at least two things. There's probably much more, but there's two that I've seen that I want to share with you. One is that it's a portion. The word just means part of the whole, right? Portion, part of the whole. Which it's good for us to be reminded, as I said earlier, that it's not like study is everything and serving is not. No, it's a whole big picture of following after Jesus. It's a whole big picture. A portion of that is our time of taking in God's word and growing in our knowledge of God, studying and learning. That's the portion that is necessary. That's the portion that must be in place. It's not either or, it's both and. But of the two, the primary, the foundational, the fundamental, what you build everything else on is our primary relationship with knowing God. The second thing is this word portion has all kind of connotations for people, Luke's Jewish readers or even his Greek readers, Romans who were familiar with the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. They would know this word. This is a key word. And the word portion many times has the idea of some meal. In other words, it comes from the idea that in the Old Testament they had 12 tribes of Israel. They come into the promised land. Each tribe inherits a portion of the land. And from that land they make their living. They derive their living. But for the tribe of Levi, from whom the priests come, they were told, your portion will be the Lord. And so the priests would come to the temple, and people would bring their sacrifices and their burnt offerings, and they would bring that before the Lord. And the priests were able to put a big fork into the meat, and what came up for them was their portion. They were serving the Lord. Their portion was the Lord. Now, from that, if you can follow, came all this figurative language so that the psalmist would say, oh Lord, you are my portion. It was used of this satisfying provision from God. I love Psalm 63. Remember, it starts out, Lord, you're oh God, you're my God. And then he says, my soul thirsts for you. My body hungers for you, longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. And then he says, I've beheld you in your sanctuary. In other words, he's talking about being in the presence of God. And he talks about worship, raising his hands in worship and praising God forever, glorifying God. And then he says, you have filled me and satisfied me with the richest of foods. Uses that language. Many of us love Psalm 73. Remember, the writer, he wrestles with envy. It feels like, the ungodly, they have the best life. And he was envious, but then God brought him into the presence of God. He says, I went into your sanctuary, and then it made sense to me. And he says, you are the only thing that satisfies. Remember how he finishes that great psalm, Psalm 73? He says, whom have I in heaven but you? And there's nothing on earth that I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. The Lord is my portion. That's why I say, when study is primary, the soul finds satisfaction. The soul's satisfied. I remember one time loading up the family in a car and heading toward Houston, where my mom lived. It was Thanksgiving, and we're going for, the great meal. And, man, I love Thanksgiving meal. I love turkey. Man, I love smoked turkey, dark meat. White meat's good. I love dark meat. Mashed potatoes. You put these English peas, kind of milky English peas on top of your potatoes. Man, I love that. Dressing, green bean casserole. I mean, all these, it is an incredible feast. And we get in the car, we head on, we stop first to get a couple of, Egg McMuffins. A little breakfast for the road, get some coffee. And so we're driving, we throw those things down, we get about halfway, stop and get gas, go inside, get some of those, those little white powdered donuts. Man, I just love those things. You just throw those down one at a time, just like potato chips. I know that's not good, but so get that, maybe pick up a Dr. Pepper with it. Oh, man, so good. So, you're driving a little bit further, and of course, she's made some cookies to bring, for the meal, and they're just right there in the back seat, and reach back there, grab a few of those cookies, throw them down. You get to Mom's house, and there's some, some kind of finger food kind of stuff, and you're throwing that down. Then it's time to carve the turkey. I'm carving the turkey, and oh man, how can you resist throwing some of that in your mouth while you're carving? You do that, don't you? Of course, you wouldn't admit it. But, I'm throwing that stuff down, and then finally, we sit down. It's all laid out, this huge feast, ready to indulge. And you think, man, this is kind of full. He's not really that hungry. And for so many of us, we chase after things other than the feast. Other than the feast. We chase after junk things. We chase after sometimes good things, which can be the enemy of best things. And we miss out on the idea that the Lord, knowing Him, moving forward, growing in our knowledge of God, taking in the Word of God, letting it just run over our soul like a rock in a river. Just smoothing out, renewing our eternal perspective, growing in more material for hero worship, as a friend of mine would say. Just taking in the Word. Like, we do not feast. We do not recognize that our portion is the Lord. And that's what Jesus is saying. It's interesting that He chooses that word. It's a little bit unusual. But Mary's chosen the right thing. It won't be taken away. She's chosen the portion. I think He's saying, where are you looking for satisfaction? It is with me. You see, when your soul is satisfied by Jesus, by growing in your knowledge of Him, when your soul is satisfied in that way, then out of the fullness of that you serve. Out of the fullness of that you do for others. But if you try to do all that without the fullness, without the intake, without drinking deeply from the Lord who is the fountain of living water, If you try to serve and give your life away without taking in the Lord, you know what it does? It leads to a complaining, controlling, bad conditioned hearts. Because when serving is primary, the soul suffers. But when study is primary, the soul finds satisfaction. The soul is satisfied. And that's what he wants us to learn. Okay, let me, having rant and rave for a while, let me just give you this first family value. All right, so it was simply this. The first family value is to learn continually. To learn continually. And then we've got a phrase that we tack on to that, the rationale behind that, because knowing God is our primary pursuit. And there you see that word primary. It's our primary pursuit, to know God. And so we're learning continually. We're listening continually to God's word. We spend time alone with God and reading his word. We connect in small groups where we study his word and we learn from each other, from God's word. From Sunday ministry, we hear God's word. And so that's our primary pursuit, knowing God. And as we think about what God has called us to do as a church, which is he's called believers everywhere to be all about making disciples and getting the gospel to every man, woman, and child. As we think about living on mission and multiplying disciples, all of that's so very central and so very important to us. Yet it's secondary. It's all secondary. The primary is that we're all like Mary. That our primary pursuit is knowing God. So that's really what we want to be about. Where the Lord, he teaches this, encourages this in several different places. In John chapter 8:31, he says, look, if you're my disciples, you will continue in my word. Literally, the word is abide in my word. Stay at home in my word. Like that's one of the things that marks a follower of Christ, that you continue in God's word. Paul the Apostle said in chapter 3 of Philippians, after kind of reviewing his old resume, like what he used to be into, what his old primary pursuits used to be, he says, man, I've laid all that side behind me. Now, what do I know? What do I want? I want to know him and the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his suffering. Like, I want to know Jesus. That's what Paul says. So that's our goal too. That's the challenge today. We're all going to make a choice. Like, is this going to become our family value? And as I said in the preamble for the Box Constitution, I said, like, we recognize success as a church with this value rests on each of us individually embracing this value. That my primary pursuit is to know God. So learn continually is our goal there. Now, what we've tried to do real quick is give us two questions that we want to see embraced by the culture of our church, so that what husbands and wives naturally do is that, once a week, or they ask each other these questions, that in a small group, that these are questions that get knocked around just casually, informally, but regularly, that as we greet each other on Sunday in the halls and catch up with each other, that these are questions that we easily ask that come from this goal, which is simply this: what has God been saying to you? And what are you going to do about it? What has God been saying to you, and what are you doing about it? Imagine if we were a church where all of us were embracing this family value to the extent that we could regularly share with each other. Like, here's what God's been saying to me. X, Y, Z. Well, man, what are you doing with that? Well, this and this. That's what we want to do. Those are the questions. That's what we want to put in front of you as our first family value. As we kind of just wind down here real quick, I mentioned earlier that Mary and Martha show up, I think, at least 3 different times. in the Gospels. And in John chapter 11, you remember that their brother Lazarus has died. And Mary and Martha call for Jesus. Jesus waits a little while before he shows up. And Mary and Martha, both two different occasions, say the same thing to him. Lord, if you had been here, our brother would not have died. All right, so they have that expressed disappointment in Jesus. Yet Jesus says to Mary, or says to Martha, look, I'm the resurrection and the life. That anyone who believes in me is going to be raised, and you're about to see the glory of God. And sure enough, he raises Lazarus from the dead. That's chapter 11. Now, in chapter 12, interestingly, what I love about this is that it's 6 days before Passover, and Jesus shows up again in Bethany. And as he shows up, we're told that they make dinner for him. In fact, let me just show this to you. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. And so they gave a dinner for him there. And Martha served. And Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary, therefore, took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, I'm really not trying to beat up on Martha, but you've got to ask the question. Is she not getting it? Martha is working, Mary's worshiping. Martha was serving, Mary was studying. Now, the chronology, you can kind of piece it together. Because after John chapter 12, the rest of the book is Jesus shows up in Jerusalem. The triumphant entry happens right after that. And so I think you can argue the case that the passage we looked at today, Luke 10, happens before John 11 and 12. And it just makes me ask the question, did she get it? And my friends, that's the question for us today. Are we going to get it? Are we going to embrace what Jesus is saying to us today? That we would embrace this family value, this biblical idea that knowing Jesus, knowing God is our primary pursuit. Therefore, we learn continually. A.W. Tozer, and I'm going to leave you with this. It says, whatever keeps me from my Bible is my enemy, however harmless it may appear to be. Whatever engages my attention when I should be meditating on God and things eternal does injury to my soul. Let the cares of life crowd out the scriptures from my mind, and I have suffered loss where I can least afford it. Let me accept anything else instead of the scriptures, and I have been cheated and robbed to my eternal confusion. Oh, Father, we really want to be people who make our primary pursuit knowing you and feasting on you. That, Lord, that you are our portion. And learning from you and listening to you and studying you and knowing your word would be our primary pursuit. God, we pray you'd make that true, that you would be our vision. We'd fix our eyes on you and knowing you and keep them there, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen.